thinking of ourselves as finely tuned musical instruments.
Mm,
Like maybe the non-HSPs are just drums, kind of more simple. Like it's just, they're going to sound good no matter what. And there's a
mm,
book that I can't remember the name. It's something has finely tuned in the title. It's about HSPs. And I just love
mm.
that. It's like we're like finely tuned violins. It's like if we're not in the right level of humidity, if we're not tuned regularly, it's like we're just kind of exquisite is the word that comes to my mind, right? Just
Oh,
finely
that's nice.
tuned. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
I
I,
really love that. I love that when I saw that in the title. I was like, oh yeah, such a nice way to
mm,
look at it, right? And you don't judge a violin for not being a drum,
right.
right?
Right.
And be like,
Yeah.
why can't it just be simpler like that drum? It's like, what? That makes no sense.
Right. 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 That makes no sense because they're not alike.
They're two different things. And we
Oh
need both.
man. Right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Biz Cush, a life coach and therapist, and your host here on the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. We're talking to women all over the world who found their way back to themselves, to their inner knowing, to their intuition, to their wisest self. We're exploring how to feel alive, authentic, engaged, and fully present in your life. Let's awaken your wise woman. Hi there, and welcome back to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. Super excited about this interview that we will be sharing shortly. But I'm your host, Biz Cush, and I hope that whether you're new to the podcast or this is the first time you're listening, I hope you'll dive in. This is a great conversation. Brooke Neilsen Yang is just just a really beautiful soul. I just connected with her so deeply in our short conversation. So I hope that you also will feel the same. If you know someone who is highly sensitive and would benefit from listening to this season of the podcast, I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll share it because sometimes being highly sensitive can feel like a burden or something we have to carry that feels really heavy. And my hope is that through the conversations this season, you will see your sensitivities as a gift. That yes, it can be hard. Yes, it can be a challenge. And we can learn to take care of ourselves, to really fully embrace and honor our sensitive nature. And yeah, that's my goal. That's my hope. And this conversation is all a part of that. So we will be talking to Brooke Neilsen Yang, and I think we should just jump in and get to it. So here's the interview. Hey, Brooke, and welcome to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast.
Thank you, Biz. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. The way I found you and decided to reach out to you was I subscribe to I think it's Sensitive Refuge
Mhm.
newsletter. And you had written a blog post or an article for that publication that landed in my inbox. And I was reading it and I was like, wow, I don't know. I just felt like you'd be the right fit for the podcast
Oh,
for
that's
this
so
season.
cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I checked out your website and yeah, it just felt like, this is going to work. And I'm so glad you said yes.
Me too. I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. So people who may not be familiar with who you are, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yes. I am Brooke, of course, Neilsen Yang, and I am a therapist and a coach based out of Denver, Colorado, though I may be moving back to California actually soon. That's my hope. And I work totally virtually though. And I've been doing this work for about 17 years, specializing in HSPs for probably about 15. Yeah, it is just my HSP is my passion and my focus. And I'm just so excited to talk with you about it because it's what I think about a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny to me, like now that I've been focusing more on it for myself and bringing it into my work, it is there so much of the time. I mean, the awareness is lovely and it's good for me too, right? To be aware of it so I can take care of myself.
That's right.
And when did you learn about high sensitivity, but recognize like, oh gosh, this is me?
I was trying to think about that this morning, and I'm pretty sure my mom, who I now know was an HSP, gave me a book back maybe early 2000s, which was very new for HSP stuff because Elaine Aron, she coined the term, has done a ton of research on it. I think she started doing that in the late 90s. So it was very fresh. No one really knew about it. I remember reading the book and going, okay, this kind of resonates. But I was like very young and I had other fish to fry. I was really struggling and it really didn't do much for me other than go, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to be quite so ashamed of who I am. And then
Mm,
it was in, I don't know, it was in maybe 2010 ish. I was new in my private practice as a therapist. And I remember trying to niche down, right? Because that's what everyone tells us like, who's your audience? Who's your audience? It's
yes,
helpful to
yes. Be really
be
clear,
really
right?
clear. It's so
Yes.
important to know who you're helping, which, yes and no. But for me, it made me go, the people who I really seem to support well, what do they have in common? So I start thinking about them and I'm like, well, they have anxiety. Okay. They're often overwhelmed. They're really passionate people. They're often really smart and creative. And I was going, what is that? And then it kind of like dawned on me in this huge aha moment that I think I'll never forget because in a way it was like, I've like found my life's purpose. I went, oh my gosh, they are HSPs. And
Yeah.
it was just this probably intuitive knowing moment. And everything changed at that point for me, how I oriented to my work, the types of people who then kind of flocked to me because, they're like, oh my God, you're speaking my language.
Yes, yes, yes. Interesting because I know I didn't really know much about it. Well, I didn't. There's a lot of reasons why, but I didn't go back to school to become a therapist till later. And
Mhm.
then as I started this podcast, as I was interviewing people, HSP stuff was coming into my world. And
Mm,
as I identified myself with it, realized how many of my clients already were. And to be able to kind of put words to what they're experiencing was so amazing. And so, yeah, I love how, as helpers and healers, if we can sort of share what it is they're experiencing in words that really help them, it helps them to find us, but also just validate what their experience is.
that's right. It's such an important lens, is what I've found, that labels are helpful when they're helpful. And I find that this is a label that when people identify with it and they take the self assessment on hsperson.com, it's like putting on glasses or maybe taking off glasses and going, oh my gosh, I have been looking at myself my whole life through one lens, the lens that my parents looked at me through, the culture looked at me through. And I internalized that quite often, these feelings of what's wrong with me. Ooh, this is kind of embarrassing, these things about me. I should probably hide
Mhm.
this. And then going,
Yes.
oh my gosh. And like looking back through almost in a life review. Oh, that time this is a personal story. I as a kid went to the movie with my mom and one of the characters in the movie got hurt in a really shocking way and I was unconsolable for the rest of the day. I was like,
Mm.
almost felt like I had experienced that trauma. And I remember my
Mhm.
mom just being confused and not really knowing how to support me well. And
Yeah.
my overarching memory of that day is so much shame of like, who goes, even as a kid, who goes to a movie and gets this upset?
Right.
So it's like
Right.
having this lens of HSP, being able to suddenly look at a thing like that, a memory like that, and go, oh my gosh, yes, I had the ability to
Right.
empathize deeply. So I'm feeling what that person was feeling
Yeah.
on the screen, and my emotions are bigger. And, suddenly I can look at that and go, oh, poor thing. Oh,
Right.
that
And you
was
were so
that was
tender
so
and young and didn't,
tender.
yeah.
And I didn't have
Yeah.
anyone
Oh,
really to go, oh, it's okay, honey. Like that makes sense that you reacted that way, you know?
right. Yes. 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 That's funny. I was thinking of, I think at least two of my kids, I have three grown sons, but I think at least two are highly sensitive. And I can remember a similar experience. We were watching a
Mm-hmm.
movie at home. It's my oldest and his younger brother. And yeah, something bad happened. I think somebody was being bullied.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, like we had to shut the movie off and just I remember that so clearly, that how upset he was, and I'm grateful that we took care of him and, was like, "It's
Oh.
okay. That wasn't really a nice movie," and then I felt bad because I was like, "Maybe that's not the right movie," but anyway, I can so relate to your experience just having experienced that with my own son.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think kids are so lucky when they have, for the parents listening, kids are really so lucky when they have HSP parents. I'm not a parent.
Mm.
I've observed it's very challenging in unique ways to be an HSP parent, to be that
Oh,
deep
yeah.
feeling, and then in this massive role.
Oh my gosh.
I am sure that, that's a whole multi-hour discussion right there, I'm sure. I
Yes.
do think though, when there's a sensitive parent and when they start to learn, oh, this is a thing, nothing's wrong with my kid, it's such a gift. It's such a gift for the
Mhm.
child to have a parent who also is like, hey, I understand what it's like to feel that
Oh,
deeply.
yes, 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 and I've seen that with the clients that I've worked with. At the time, I didn't have a name
Of
for it.
course.
My oldest was born in '89, so, like, there really wasn't a lot of any information out there about it, but I could just relate to his
That's
needs,
right.
right? Like, he wanted to spend time alone, and
That's
like,
right.
"Okay, that's fine. You can do that."
That's right.
Yeah, and the big emotions for sure. But also too, just like the sensory stuff. Like, I don't know if you experienced that as a kid or even in your adulthood, just whether it's clothing or other noises or bright light or whatever, if some of that stuff impacted you as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that for a lot of HSPs, there's certain senses that are more sensitive than others. Of course, some people, it's all of them. For me,
Hmm.
I would say the most sensitive sense is sound,
Yeah.
then probably sight. Like if there's flashing lights or something really, I don't know, intense, I might often guard my eyes, cover my eyes. But yeah, I would say sound, I'm so sensitive to. I have this funny memory I always laugh with my best friend about. I was like 26 in living in San Diego, and she and I, it was the 4th of July, and she and I like took bikes and were riding along the coast. So it's just a sweet thing to do, kind of innocent. We're riding along the coast, and there are these people out on balconies and on their houses having these 4th of July parties. And this is the time you might think of my life at 26 that I would be at one of those parties, right? Like letting loose, no responsibilities. And we're riding by this house, and they're just like yelling and so loud. And I like said under my breath, like, be quiet, gosh, be quiet. And I was really annoyed by their level of noise. And I remember like my friend and I laughing that day a bit, like, I can kind of laugh about it. But even since then to go, yeah, there's never been a point in my life where I was like,
Mm.
woohoo, party. It was like always like that is too much. And I would really like you to settle down.
Please just turn the
Just
volume, turn the energy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please. We will go better for all of us. And this morning, as I was prepping for our talk today, I was thinking about my experience as an HSP, and really what came to me is that there are two phases of my personal journey. There, phase
Mm-hmm.
one was, I think, understanding my sensory needs, understanding the reality of
Mm-hmm.
sensitivity and the
Mm-hmm.
validity of it and how to take care of myself and my needs. And a lot of that was sensory and emotion. And
Yeah.
then kind of phase two, which is maybe the more of the last 10 years I can talk about later, is more about empathy and being an empath and the struggles around that. So I would say the
Yeah.
first big stretch of my journey really was, how the heck do I live in the world that's very loud, very overstimulating,
Oh my
right?
gosh. So
So
overstimulating.
overstimulating without just being a hermit, which I have been at certain times in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a part of quite a few Facebook groups for highly sensitive people. And that's so much of what I hear there too, is people struggling with the amount of sensory
Yes.
overload that just is in the world, whether it's their job or just living life,
Yes.
and really not having, I don't know if they just don't have the resources or just haven't put into place what they need to take care of themselves and their sensory input, right?
That's
Like
right.
the boundaries or the realization of how do I take care of myself when I do feel overwhelmed.
That's right. When I'm already there, when I can't prevent it, then what?
Yes,
Right.
yes, yeah. And are there things that you have learned in this part of your that part of your
Mhm.
journey that have really helped you? I mean, I know I still sometimes get overwhelmed because there are things we
Same.
can't control,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. Yes. And while the earlier part of my journey was figuring that stuff out, I'm still figuring it out and will always be figuring it out because the world is ever changing, right? There's always new circumstances. And I've
Mhm.
come to believe there is no, when I see, I don't know if I've ever been here, but when I see people kind of pitching, oh, help for HSP, you'll never be overwhelmed again. That
Ooh.
is BS because yes, we will. I mean, I've just kind of come to accept that. It's to your point. How
Yeah.
do I help it happen less? And how do I recover better once it does?
Mhm.
So, I mean, some things I do are very little, some things are bigger, a smaller thing with a huge impact. My husband is a big hockey fan, and hockey games, I think, are HSP nightmares. They're like, it's the loudest thing. Again, going back to sound for me, there's just the blasting music. And then they're literally having contests with the audience of how high, how loud can we scream? And they'll get the decibel meter up on the, up
Oh
on
my
the
gosh.
screen. So I take loop earplugs, which is a bit, well, I've tried to. I've used my AirPods, which you can do noise canceling.
Mhm.
And then there's, if people aren't familiar with it, it's called Loop. And they are earplugs that basically just close, like you can still hear through them, but they make the hole that you're hearing through smaller. So it's
Mhm.
been shown to lower the decibels that get through.
Yeah.
And so I went, it had a profound impact. I went from like being very stressed at these games, or I went to one and I was like, this is fun, but after after
Can't they just make it quieter? Yeah,
yeah,
right.
exactly. Who can I talk to about that? So after, 30 minutes, I'm kind of in pain in a way. I'm just overstimulated. Like I'm no longer having fun,
Yeah,
right?
you just begin to check out, I think.
Check
Yeah, yeah.
out or
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get I can get grouchy.
Yeah.
So putting in the earplugs suddenly, I'll laugh at my husband and go, "Oh my God, is this what life is like for non-HSPs?" It's pleasant. I'm like, "Oh, how
Mm.
fun. People are yelling."
Oh
So
my gosh.
sometimes tools as little as that have made really big impacts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas other times it takes a little more effort for me. And this then goes to relationships. When I was younger, I would never, some of that good girl stuff. I want to be agreeable. I don't want to seem challenging. I don't want to be judged. So if friends are like, let's go here. And I know it's a very loud restaurant.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, sounds fun. And maybe if I'm like, I would even judge myself. Come
Yeah.
on. No,
Yeah.
normal, quote unquote, normal people can just go to a loud restaurant, right?
Yeah.
And well, that was what I would say to myself. And then after really owning more, hey, this is a trait, right? Just to name that, this is a trait. that we are born with, like our eye color.
Right.
It has nothing to do with personality or my character.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to take that seriously, I need to acknowledge that I have needs. If I ignore those needs, there are consequences, sometimes to my relationships, because then I'm not having fun, they're not having fun. I'm
Right.
stressed out. So it took a while for me to have the courage and the confidence to say, "Hey friends, that's going to be a little too intense for me. How about this place? It's a little bit quieter, all about the ambiance."
Yeah.
And all my friends, many of whom are HSP, but I'm probably the most sound sensitive out of everybody, but they're like, "Sure, you know,
Yeah. We just want to be together. Right.
yeah, we don't care where we go." Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I can definitely relate to the sound thing. That can be,
And you?
yeah. Well, it took me a long time to realize how impactful sound was for my sleep. Just
Oh,
like if
yes.
the television's on too loud, or if music, my husband loves to have music on in the house, if it's too loud
Mhm.
or too not music that feels soothing to me,
Yeah,
yeah, that it can really just disrupt my equilibrium.
that's
But
right.
yeah, now I wear earplugs when I go to sleep, which is amazing.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
Because otherwise, the smallest sounds would wake me up, and then I'd be awake and not be able to go back to sleep. And
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which, do you want to know an interesting thing I think I've just observed is that the trait is stable, but we can be more sensitive when we're run down or
Oh,
when we haven't been taking care of ourselves, right? So I
yes.
notice even with my loop earplugs at these hockey games, if I was stressed out, I hadn't been sleeping well, eating well, whatever, it has stuff going on, I'm going to get maxed out sooner. If I was like totally like resource, sleeping well, have a great week, do a lot of self care, I'm like, wow, I have a lot more capacity. I don't know if you
Yeah.
ever could see that for yourself.
Oh, 100%. Yes, yes, yes. Well, I just think about raising kids, right? If I was
Mm,
exhausted and tired and they were whatever, too loud, maybe their emotional needs were so big that
yeah,
I was depleted. For me, I'd go to irritation, right? I'd be
yes.
frustrated. I could get angry easily. And I just actually learned recently that, yeah, anger and irritation can be a reaction to being overstimulated. I'm like,
Isn't that
oh my gosh,
fascinating?
right.
Yes. Yes. Amazing. I forget that quite often. And I'll go,
Yeah,
why
yeah,
am I
yeah.
irritated? And if I follow the thread, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I'm
Yes.
overstimulated. Yeah.
Yeah, and in many ways, it helps me, I feel like I go less to the anger and irritation today, but it still happens. Like you said,
Mhm.
the overwhelm doesn't just get fixed, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
we we still have to manage it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're a big music family, so we go to a lot of live concerts and music. So I find even just preparing myself, like
Mhm.
I know this is going to be a lot. Can I prepare myself for the amount of
Mhm.
stimulus that's going to happen? And,
Mhm.
if I need to get up and go to the bathroom and just take a break, go get some
That's
water,
right.
whatever it is, it's like I'm acknowledging for my sensitive parts, like, okay, this is probably going to be a lot,
That's right.
but I know that I enjoy it as well to be there with my family or my husband or whatever.
That's right. And acknowledging, I know this is going to be a thing, but I can take care of myself is really big. Like saying to our parts, I will take care of you is so
Hmm.
powerful. And
Hmm.
it's so funny you just brought up music because I literally was just thinking of ourselves in terms of we'll always get overwhelmed sometimes, thinking of ourselves as finely tuned musical instruments.
Mm.
Like maybe the non-HSPs are just drums, kind of more simple. Like it's just, they're going to sound good no matter what. And there's a
Mm.
book that I can't remember the name. It's something has finely tuned in the title. It's about HSPs. And I just love
Mm.
that. It's like we're like finely tuned violins. It's like if we're not in the right level of humidity, if we're not tuned regularly, it's like we're just kind of exquisite is the word that comes to my mind, right? Just
Oh,
finely
that's
tuned.
nice.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
I
Uh,
really love that. I love that when I saw that in the title. I was like, oh, yeah, such a nice way to
mm,
look at it, right? And you don't judge a violin for not being a drum,
right.
right?
Right.
And be like,
Yeah.
why can't it just be simpler like that drum? It's like, what? That makes no sense.
Right. 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 That makes no sense because they're not alike.
They're two different things. And we
Oh
need both.
man. Right.
Yeah,
Well, and I think probably one of the most important practices is that sort of level of compassion for yourself, right? You said for your parts, your sensitive parts, the parts that get activated around your sensitivities,
yeah,
whether it's the shame or the blaming yourself or I should just suck it up and make this work.
that's
Yeah,
right.
just compassion for those and recognize those are how we coped probably back in the day,
That's
but
right. That's
that we
yes.
don't necessarily need to do that today.
That's right. That's right.
Mm. And so today, I mean, it's obvious from what you're talking about that your sensitivity has impacted your work because you work with highly sensitive people and that you've made that your life's work. How do you help your clients? I know sometimes when I've brought high sensitivity up to clients in a very gentle way, like, hey, this is what I'm hearing. It's almost as if I don't know if they feel like it's a burden, but it's like, oh, one more thing that I'm going to have to deal with versus like,
Yeah.
oh, this really explains me and I really get it. Have you found that with clients ever?
Occasionally, I think because HSP is like all over my websites, if somebody comes to me, they're
They're
like,
already looking
got
for
it.
it.
Right? They're
That
like
makes sense.
already kind of looking at that.
That
But
makes
I
sense.
I completely get it why if somebody hasn't already come to that themselves and they just hear another thing. And I think going back to what you were just saying about parts of us that hold shame,
Hmm.
if they're already holding a lot of shame, then
Yeah.
having a label, it's almost like shame can grab onto that and be like, see, there's another thing wrong with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, I have had clients have to work through that layer to get down to more where it's like, hey, this is actually a beautiful mirror of the
Mm.
wonderful parts of you, you know, but people, yeah, it can take a minute for them to see and
Yeah.
then see how it's relevant. And then there are others for whom it's like, I don't like that. You know, I don't want it a label. That just doesn't work for me. But yeah,
Sure.
I don't meet many of those people because I'm not their person.
You're not, yes, that's not who they're looking for.
Yeah.
But so how when you do work with your clients, because obviously this is very much what you do,
Yeah.
how do you help them sort of go through these stages that you were just talking about, right?
Right. Well, I'm sure you know as a therapist and coach, it's so different for each person. At the same time, in my coaching practice, I've actually created a couple different programs that try to take apart what does everybody have in common here
Mhm.
so that I can get people some of that really important foundational understanding. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to name some of those things. I think
Yeah.
there's a couple things. One is we tend to abandon ourselves. We tend to have abandoned ourselves by the time we're adults, unless someone is so lucky to have parents who just really got it or be surrounded by supportive community. And I find that quite rare. I certainly didn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Me
And
neither.
so by the time we're adults, I was in the same boat. So many of us have abandoned ourselves and are essentially operating as some version of who we think we should be or who we need to be to stay safe in the world. If I am this way over here that looks less sensitive, people won't criticize and judge me.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think after the phase of, oh my gosh, this explains so much, I am highly sensitive, then it's this period of looking at who is the authentic me? Like, who even is me? Who was I prior to that? And sometimes there was a no prior, right? Sometimes we've
Yeah.
been coping
Born
since the
into yeah.
beginning,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Born
Right.
into it's not safe to be me.
Yeah.
But it's never too late to start coming back to going, what without all this layers of crap on top of me, the shame and the hiding, who am I, and what does it look like to be authentically me in the world? And that I found is it's simple yet so profound and can take a long time,
Hmm.
because it's like then we're bumping up against, well, what if my family doesn't like the real me? What if my friends or my partner doesn't like the real me?
Yeah.
So then there's
Yeah.
also an exploring of relationship dynamics. And
Mm.
for example, the second half of my HSP journey that I referred to earlier has been exploring me as empath. So me as, and this I would say a lot of HSPs resonate with this, of taking on, just since I was a kid, so feeling the emotions of others.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
there's scientific and familial reasons for that.
Yep.
It's both.
Yep.
And so even after I had all my HSP tools in my toolbox, I was like, why am I still getting thrown when I say, talk to a friend who's having a really hard day, and I get off and I feel as heavy as she was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I'm
Yeah.
like, now I'm really sad. And I'm like, what is happening here? And I couldn't get out of that.
Hmm.
Right. And so then there's layers of, for me, both, okay, some of this is wiring. I am an empathizer through and through. That's built in.
Yep.
And I learned in my family, hey, you better be extra attuned, one, to other people. You better be extra attuned because you never know who's going to lose their cool. So
Yep.
you better be real tapped in. And then two, I learned in my family, oh, because I'm so emotionally capable, yeah, I can hold so much. Hey, it's going to be my job to hold all the stuff that the family doesn't want to
Mm.
feel,
Mm.
right?
Wow. Yes. 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 Yeah.
So there's layers like that
Mm.
I have had to, and so many of my clients, like we have to explore. It's like we can't really throw up protection shields if a part of us is like, no, 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 but it's my job to feel everybody's stuff. They're not going to work, right?
No, no, they're going to keep trying to do their job. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No matter how much you try to reason. I mean,
That's
until
right.
you fully allow them to heal. And yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's a process there. It's not
Yeah.
just a flip of the switch. Just stop it.
Right.
So
Right.
those are just a couple of the pieces that I
Mm.
find that most HSP empaths have to contend with. And it
Yeah.
looks a little different for everybody, but there's an underlying theme, right? Of we have to come home to ourselves.
Oh my gosh. And I love that. I love that. I know you talked about that before we started recording, that phrase of coming home to yourself as a tool or as a way to really reconnect with your, like you said, your true self, right? With
That's
who
right.
you are. I think there's something about that on my homepage of my therapy website,
Mhm.
coming home to yourself,
Oh,
because
beautiful.
so much of the journey is right, learning to love yourself as you are, right?
That's right. I think at first we start with a more mental construct. Oh, okay, I need to love myself and accept myself, right? But then it's really like more embodied. It's how do I live from authentic me?
Mhm.
What does that even mean? Right?
Yeah.
Most there's probably a lot of people like, what does that mean? When it's like I have been living as a version of myself.
Oh my
What does it
gosh.
even mean to connect on the inside to authentic me?
Right?
And then eventually stop hiding that and just let it show.
Right? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Oh, I can just think of, I think like becoming a therapist almost created this almost split in my personality. Like this is the
Mhm.
part, this is the me I show up with in my personal life. This is the me in my professional life. And it got to the point where I was like, well, wait a minute, neither of them feel like
Wow.
me.
Yes.
Right. Like I just, oh,
That's
so that
right.
was a process. But
Oh,
yes,
that's
I can
powerful.
so relate to that. And yeah, so tell us a little bit about your work and how you're help. I know you've been talking about that, but about your program, you said this come home to yourself. You're doing a workshop, I think you told me.
Yeah, I'm doing a complimentary workshop on November 13th.
Nice.
And it is going to be awesome. It's going to be, I think, if you resonate with what I was just talking to, it's just starting to come home to ourselves, doing a little bit of talking about it, but also experiential stuff. What does it mean to find me inside
Yeah.
of me? What
Yeah.
the heck does that even mean? So
Mm,
it'll just be a time to one, be around other sensitives, which I think is mind blowing for a lot of us. It's
yeah.
pretty special.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I'll be just talking about that and we'll do some experiential exercises to start coming home to ourselves. That's probably the easiest way to connect with me at this point. I also have a couple other free research or resources on my site.
Nice. Well, it's funny, you saying like being mind blowing. It's mind blowing being around other sensitives. I think that was one of the drivers of having the podcast focus on highly sensitive women because now I get to have all these amazing conversations with
Yeah.
highly sensitive women, like an intentional conversation around our sensitivity, which just felt really meaningful to me.
So valuable. Same.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. So, last question, other than sharing how to find you, what do you love most about being an HSP?
I love that question. Thank you for asking it. I don't know the last time anyone's asked me that. That's so fun.
Oh, oh.
It's really changed over time. The thing I have been adoring the last couple of years is my intuition.
Mm,
That I think I wanted to say this is the final frontier for me. Who knows? Maybe there's other layers, but I'm so deeply intuitive and it's something I just squashed from a young age. And in the last, I don't know, 5 years, really letting that out, it almost feels like coming out of the closet. Like sometimes that
um,
languaging
yeah.
resonates with me where I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I just know things. And not, I mean, sometimes it's in kind of a spiritual sense, other times just in a very grounded sense. But it's been this cool way to anchor into myself to just be like, oh, I can just tap into that intuition and I know what's a better move for me today. Oh, yeah, I think I want to do this instead of this. I love it. And I think as somebody who has a limited amount of energy, it's almost been like discovering this well of energy that doesn't
Mm,
get tapped out, that is
mm.
fun to use and kind of abundant. So, yeah, that has been a real joy to explore.
That's so cool. I feel like that intuition is something that we do well, if we have not learned how to embrace our sensitivities and really understand them, like I think we are genuinely intuitive beings and that it can get lost. And that sense of like, who am I without the intuition is really hard to fully connect, I think, with yourself until that sort of blossoms and you learn to trust yourself.
That is such a good point. Like, it's such a fundamental part. Can we really fully come home to ourselves without the intuitive piece?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm, Brooke, this has been just I love these conversations, but really, really lovely to
Oh,
spend this
thank
time with
you.
you. I really
Thank you,
appreciate you being
Biz.
on the podcast. And so, how do listeners find you if they are considering, yeah, your workshop or however they might want to, know more about you?
Yeah, the best way to find me is on my site, intuitivewarriorway.com.
Oh, I love that. I love that. All right. Well, I will include your website in the show notes. So if anybody is listening to this and doesn't have a pen, they'll be able to find it there. Well, thanks
Awesome.
again for
Thank
coming
you
on the
so much,
podcast.
Biz.
And yeah, this was great.
My pleasure.
Oh, what a wonderful conversation with Brooke. She is just a lovely soul. I am so appreciating all of these conversations with sensitive women, and this was no exception. As I mentioned in our conversation, that I found Brooke through a blog post that she wrote for the Sensitive Refuge community. And there's a newsletter that goes out. And it's funny because I don't necessarily read all the pieces that, when the newsletter comes through, sometimes it just doesn't resonate for whatever reason. So sometimes I don't click on it and don't read through what they're offering, or what they're sharing. But for some reason, I don't remember what the article was that she had posted with them, but it just, I almost could feel her energy through her writing. And that was really beautiful. And that was why I reached out to her. So I'm so glad she said yes. So glad she was on the podcast. Coming home to yourself resonates so deeply with me. I think this is what I've shared on my therapy website about my own personal journey, is that coming home to myself has been a huge part of my healing, to just fully embrace who I am, all my sensitivities, my wounded parts, my protective parts. And it was lovely to connect with her on that as well. Well, you can find me on Instagram at Awaken Your Wise Woman, or you can connect with me through my website if you're interested in working with me. And that's elizabethcushcoaching.com. My last name is spelled with a C, not a K. So if you're Googling me, Elizabeth Cush, make sure Cush is spelled Cush. I hope that you all have a fabulous week. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope that whenever you are listening to this, you are taking care of yourself. I look forward to connecting with you next time here on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Music by Andy Cush, sound editing by Laura Disler, and show notes by Kathy Cush. If you'd like more information about me, Biz Cush, and the resources shared today, go to awakenyourwisewoman.com.